So, about 40 years after I first bought this, I am going to try for the very first time to play the Avalon Hill classic of Rise and Decline of the Third Reich. It was a game that I hankered after while I was cutting my teeth on simpler Avalon Hill games, but having bought it, I never played it. It has travelled around the UK with me in a variety of boxes, shoved in a variety of lofts, never seen the light of day. But I think now is the time, before it's too late, to give it a go. It is a hugely complex beast. Well, I say that. On the surface it seems complex, but I think the vast bulk of the complexity comes from a calculation at the start of each turn of the economic driving or engine of the game, the basic resource point mechanism, and how those are spent sort of requires a certain amount of paperwork. The game comes with these individual little mats for each of the 6 major powers, and it's possible to track the basic resource points along here. There's also kind of holding space for the force pools and some sort of specific scenario instructions there. But I think it makes more sense to try and keep track of the basic resource points on a piece of paper, really. But it does, that kind of speaks to the fact that there is a degree of accountancy in the game. But actually, the mechanics of movement and combat are really fairly simple. And if we just narrow down onto the playing pieces, and we can see things shaping up here. At the start of 1939, I'm going to play the 1939 scenario, which runs up to spring or summer of 1942. The counters are really very simple, infantry, armour, some air units, some naval units up here, and that is pretty much it. The numbers are their combat values to the left and their movement points to the right. So not a lot of complexity there. Where there is another additional layer of complexity that I'm kind of trying to get my head around is in the relationship between major powers, those being Germany, Britain, France, the US when it comes in. It will barely come in this scenario, Italy and the USSR. In a 2-player game, which is what I'm playing, kind of divided up into the Allies and the Axis. Though there are sort of restrictions on how closely the Allies, the Soviets and the British and French can sort of cooperate with each other. But you'll also notice that there are obviously all the other sort of slightly minor powers. So if we look down here, Hungary, Romania, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, so on and so forth. Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria beginning as German minor powers, but not yet in the war. German troops can move through them, but they are not yet in the war. And so the relationship between the various minor powers, it gets particularly complicated out in the Mediterranean. There's a whole variety of smaller states. You can see down here, Lebanon, Syria begins controlled by the French, Transjordan controlled by the British. And it is that aspect of the game that I am trying to get my head around. But I think what I'm going to do in a moment is just sort of crack on and play it. And I think the sort of niceties of how those small powers are affected will become clear as it goes along. Suffice to say, there are kind of 2 drivers of victory. I mean, ostensibly, victory is determined by, in the 2-player version of the 1939 scenario that I'm playing, by control of these, again, if I focus down, of these red objective cities. So we can see Budapest, Lvov, Warsaw, so on and so forth. They spread across the map, and the game will end with a kind of basic calculation of who has control of the most of those. And so that's fairly straightforward. But as I said at the beginning, this is an economic game in many ways. And what drives, I suppose, decisions is that in trying to gain more basic resource points and increasing the basic resource point base of each of the major powers, is you're kind of obliged to conquer smaller nations because they come with, as you can see here, Yugoslavia, 20 BRPs, basic resource points. And as countries expand and begin to fight, as the major powers expand and begin to fight or defend as best they can, control of these BRPs are what drive their economies, and equally loss of your colonies or your starting allies, minor allies, eats into your economic base. So the game, as far as I can tell, is driven by those sort of two imperatives. One, obviously, simply to capture the red objective hexes, just simply to win the game. But secondly, there is a drive to push and to move because you need to capture those countries that deliver those BRPs. And without doing that and leaving those countries to your opponents means that economically, in the end, you will lose the game. That, at least, is how I understand it. So what we can see is I've set the game up. There are no starting hexes, so I've set the game up best as I can kind of do, having never played the game before. So I have no idea whether this setup makes sense. I suppose what we can see then is obviously here we have the Poles, who are a minor power allied to Britain and France at the beginning. You can see them lined up here with some fairly weak units. They have this river here, is it the Vistula, I think, which will provide some defensive bonus. They're defending Warsaw. Minor powers or minor countries are conquered simply when their capital is conquered. So the Germans will be looking to capture Warsaw pretty quickly. Along here we have the Soviets. There is a non-aggression pact in play between the Germans and the Soviets, which essentially means that although the Soviets can come into parts of Eastern Europe, this dotted line here is the extent of how far they can advance without prompting an early declaration of war from the Germans, who are otherwise restricted in the timing of that. So I think we will see the Germans conquering Poland and then turning their attention to France, though no doubt needing in some way to garrison against a Soviet early incursion. Over here we can see I've set the French up as best I can. The Italians start neutral, not yet involved in the war, but they need to make a declaration of war, which I suspect they will do fairly soon, whether up there against France or here in the Mediterranean, where you can see the Italians here in Libya. Not quite sure what that is, that shouldn't be there. And then the British here in Egypt and round into Palestine, Gibraltar, and then I don't know whether I've left too many British units in Britain, whether I should have been more assiduous in equipping North Africa. But anyway, look, as I say, I'm playing this for the first time. I have no real idea how this will play out, but I think it'll be a bit of fun to have a look. There's a fairly detailed sequence of play, and when I come back to this, I will start working through that sequence of play very incrementally and slowly, and hopefully in the process embed the rules and see how it goes. But anyway, I'll post these videos from time to time, and it will be fun to see how this venerable old classic goes.